All right, it's Blackbeard Mirage. I'm back. Good evening. Just want to welcome the ladies and gentlemen. You tuned in for another Midnight Mirage Classic. So what we're going to do on this tape this evening is we're going to deal with some Naga or some Negus sciences. All right, we're going to deal with some Naga or some Negus sciences, and we're going to go a little bit into alchemical transmutation. All right. So be that we are in the season of Capricorn right now, getting ready to go into the numerical quote-unquote year of 2020. I wanted to make a tape, for the people out there to realize and understand that we're supposed to be transmutating our, thoughts and transmutating our mind, and we're supposed to be thinking about higher things and basically taking ourselves spiritually to a whole higher vibration. All right. I know a lot of us have been, coming into a lot of history and understanding that, a lot of our people are not from the so-called continent of Africa and that we are here from America. But one thing I am noticing is a lot of people are kind of getting lost and getting caught up and they're getting stuck at that. And they aren't continuing their journeys. What you're going to understand, by researching in depth is that, whether it's the people of so-called Africa or the ancient people of so-called America, both of them understood Naga or Negus sciences, and both of them were about transmutating the mental carbon or the melanin in the neural, the cerebral spinal fluid, the melanin in, our central nervous system, etc. These people were very, very concerned with transmutating that melanin in the brain or that melanin in the mind or that melanin throughout the body, transmutating that from the blackening stage or the negrito stage into the golden stage or the diamond stage. Let me repeat that real quick. So our ancestors, these same, glorious people that a lot of us are just now finding out about and we're giving all this praise to, these people were not concerned with history. These people already knew about their own birthrights and inheritances, and they knew what nations they were from. They knew what lands they were from. So if that's not what they were concerned with, that means that they weren't studying the same things as us today. They weren't trying to figure out about, like tribal names and all this other stuff that we're trying to figure out because we're so far behind. So if they already knew that, then the real question is that, well, what were they studying? And they really were studying a lot of, advanced sciences that had a lot to do with spirituality and overall evolving from the mundane human state, at the current state that we know it, So part of doing that is, evolving the cerebral spinal fluid and evolving the central nervous system melanin that they found out about. So when you all hear about the cosmic darkness or the dark waters of noon, the dark waters of the abyss, the dark waters of creation, and all these different cool, names that we hear about in literature, this ultimately is this creative, melanin substance that's also in our skin pigmentation, but it's also in our spinal cord. It's in our sexual organs. It's coating our organs inside of our body. And it is also in our central nervous system as well. So getting this melanin to go from the carbon stage to the gold stage is what we're supposed to be doing. This is why you will see, whether it's the ancient emperors of the Peruvian Empire or the Incan Empire, the ancient emperors of the Mayan Empire, or the ancient emperors, what you all call the so-called Egyptian Empire, they all have the Naga or the Negus serpent on their crown in one way or another. So the so-called ancient Egyptian is not the only culture who used the serpent or the golden serpent or the bronze or the copper serpent. That's not the only culture that used that as a symbol of illuminating the central nervous system melanin. All the cultures used it in one way or another. So even when you all see in the Hindu system, with Shiva, or you may see with Krishna, etc., you will see them accompanied by 7 snakes behind their heads. So you'll see 7 hooded cobras, behind their head. All right. Another reason why America is called Land of the Plumed Serpent, and you see Quetzalcoatl, and it's this plumed serpent, and you also see the caduceus of Mercury on the medical vehicles or at the medical office, and it's a plumed serpent or a serpent with wings. That's also representing the Naga or the Negus serpent, which goes back to the mental sphere of the human being, or the melanin that is inside of the central nervous system of the human being being transmutated from the black stage to the gold stage. So this really is what the whole illumination process is about. The different cultures call it different things. You know what I'm saying? Some of them call it Kundalini. Some of them call it the awakening. It's all these different terms and names. Some of them call it the tantric system, etc. But nevertheless, it's all going back to the same thing. It is transmutating the creative, cosmic, spiritual substance that our soul oozes off, that is swimming up and down in our central nervous system, using this creative substance and transmutating it to a higher level so we can have a better experience on this earth. And there really ain't no telling what else we'll be able to do with it. Okay? So this shit is all about Naga transmutation, going into 2020. And it's about staying focused on that. So yeah, you're gonna figure out your tribal name doing this research and all that other stuff, and that's cool. But really it's beyond that, because really we have a spiritual origin. They tell you that the Adam, or the autochthonous indigenous person of the planet, is one who sprung forth from the soil. And then it'll also tell you in the Old Testament that after the original person was sprung forth from the soil, that the Most High, or the creative spirit, blew breath into that being that sprung forth from the soil. So the real question is that, well, where is the soul or the spiritual aspect coming from? We know that our body and the physical matter that we're made of comes from the dirt and the dust of the earth. But where does the spiritual aspect of us come from? So the ancient, people of America or Atlantis, this is what they were concerned with. They weren't worried about that low-level bullshit that a lot of us is worried about. So we need to get up off that. So the next thing we want to go into is just, some real basic stuff, what I'm saying? Because we go slowly going to this melanin thing, but not necessarily always talking about the melanin that's coating the skin, but also the melanin that is in the central nervous system as well. But one of the components, or one of the properties of melanin is it is a conductor, or a semiconductor, all right? So just real quick, we'll read a definition of what a semiconductor is. Semiconductor is a material that is neither a good conductor or a good insulator, but that conducts more electricity when heat, light, or voltage is added. So the main part we want to get in this is that a semiconductor conducts more electricity or more energy when heat, light, or voltage is added. So when you add heat, light, or voltage to a semiconductor, it will create more electricity, more energy. Okay? So also think about heat being also pressure, because think about how the black pressure of the coal that's up underneath the ground, or up underneath the volcano, or wherever it is, after all that geometric pressure, it eventually turns into the diamond. So keep in mind how the melanin is a black coal, and under extreme heat or extreme pressure, it transmutates into the gold or the diamond. All right? So we're going into the properties of it. So next, real quick, we're just dealing with some basic stuff. I want to read and talk a little bit about what eumelanin is, okay? Eumelanin, EU melanin. So you spell that EUMELANIN, eumelanin, all right? This is just a basic article I got online. You can easily find this. It's called Heat Treatment Turns Melanin into an Electrical Conductor. So that's heat treatment turns melanin into an electrical conductor. Just going over some basic stuff so we'll know what melanin is. We're going to take all the, the mysticism out of it and just see how it, correlates and how it is, operating in the central nervous system of the human brain, okay? So we can see that, okay, if I want to use my melanin, where do I use it? So that means that if it's in your central nervous system and that's the, key place where it's being housed at, that means that you need to be getting ready to use it through the mental sphere, okay? So once again, all this stuff is inside of you, so it's not like you can pick your melanin up, with your hands or nothing like that. You got to use it from the inside. So just real quick, it says, eumelanin is a form of melanin and conducts electricity in its natural state, all right? So that's just really what I wanted you all to get out of that. It's just still understanding that this melanin, or this eumelanin, conducts electricity in its natural state. So we're talking about a conductor, one who is transmutating different forms of energy into different states, all right? And speaking of that, we're about to go now into the electromagnetic spectrum, okay? Because the melanin also deals with light, and it deals with the electromagnetic spectrum. So think about how the coal turns into the diamond, but think about one is a blackening stage where the light is being absorbed and no light is allowed to pass through, and thinking about 1 being the illuminated stage where the light is allowed to pass through. Okay, so that's why when you see the diamond and you got the diamond cuts, when it hit the sun, you see the diamond starting to dance. And, all the brothers, in the rap shit, that's why when they be in the sun, they grill and they diamond be dancing, because the diamond is allowing the light to refract, bend, go through it, etc. Whereas if you have the black or the blackening stage or the carbon stage, it's going to absorb the light, right? So we try to just deal with some real basic science here. We don't want this confusing to nobody. We really want everybody to get what this shit means, all right? So next we're going to read about the electromagnetic spectrum, so you can see how solar light, or the sunlight, which is the primary light that we're dealing with, we're also receiving light from the moon, and we're also receiving light from the stars. But the primary light that we really receiving, majority of our light from is the sun. Okay, so it's the solar light that we're receiving. But the sun is giving us various forms of light. And the melanin inside of our central nervous system is transmutating that solar light, and it's breaking it down, and it's using it in different forms and different ways. All right, so let's read a little bit about the different ways it's breaking down the solar light. The electromagnetic spectrum is the range of all types of EM radiation. Radiation is energy that travels and spreads out as it goes. The visible light that comes from a lamp in your house and the radio waves that come from a radio station are 2 types of electromagnetic radiation. The other types of EM radiation that make up the electromagnetic spectrum are microwaves, infrared light, ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. You know more about the electromagnetic spectrum than you think. The image below shows where you might encounter each portion of the electromagnetic spectrum in your day-to-day life. So now we're about to go into the different variations of the electromagnetic spectrum, and how most of you already been dealing with it and you don't even realize it. So let's see. All right, so we're gonna go from low frequencies to very, very high frequencies. Excuse me. So you got radio waves. Your radio captures radio waves emitted by radio stations, bringing your favorite tunes. Radio waves are also emitted by stars and gases in space. So the same way that the radio station is emitting radio waves, and your radio station at home, when you have it turned to that same station, it's receiving those radio waves. And from receiving these radio waves, that's how you hear your favorite songs being played on the radio. Well, the same way that the radio station is emitting off those radio waves, the stars and gases in space are also emitting off radio waves. So that's why sometimes when we think we hearing something, sometimes we may be receiving radio waves from, a non-remote environment. You know what I'm saying? We could be receiving radio waves from somewhere that's not even anywhere near where we are right now. All right, so that's an example of radio waves. Microwave radiation will cook your popcorn in just a few minutes, but it is also used by astronomers to learn about the structure of nearby galaxies. So we have the microwaves, and of course we know about the microwave that we use in the kitchen. The microwave is using a certain type of radiation that's also a form that the sun can give off. So now you understand how it's cooking the food is using a certain type of power or a strong, quote unquote frequency, that's cooking the popcorn or cooking the frozen dinner and making it hot. You know what I'm saying? That's why when you put something in there frozen and then you put it on 2 minutes, when you take it out, that shit be hot. That's because it's using microwaves to heat it up. Next, you have infrared. Night vision goggles pick up the infrared light emitted by our skin and objects with heat. In space, infrared light helps us map the dust between stars. So that could be like when you out at nighttime, and let's say you in the woods and it's real dark and you can't see. Well, if you put on some infrared goggles, or basically some goggles with a lens that can capture infrared light that's being emitted off by any object that has heat, anything in the forest or the woods that has heat, emitting off of it, you're gonna see it through the infrared light. So of course that would include human beings, and then that would include animals and stuff that you may see running around in the woods. So now you understand how, this heat or this light is also synonymous. So when you hear heat, also think about light. All right. Next, visible. The visible light spectrum. Our eyes detect visible light. Fireflies, light bulbs, and stars all emit visible light. So visible light is what you see all around you. You know, the color spectrum, the red, the yellow, the green, the blue, the purple, etc., the pink. These are the visible light spectrums. But please understand that there are colors that we've never seen before. You know, there are colors we've never seen before. All right. So next you have the ultraviolet. Ultraviolet radiation is emitted by the sun and are the reason skin tans and burns ultraviolet radiation is emitted by the sun and are the reason skin tans and burns. Hot objects in space emit UV radiation as well. So ultraviolet radiation is what's used in tanning beds. All right, so when people want to get some color on them, just like they would want to do in this time of Capricorn when it's cold and it's dark, people go to tanning beds, and these tanning beds emit or give off ultraviolet radiation. Now, ultraviolet radiation clearly is much stronger than microwave radiation. All right, so if a person were to use, radio waves, it's not going to tan them like an ultraviolet radiation would. All right, so you can clearly see that the different, levels of the radiation, some of them are much hotter and stronger than the other ones. All right, next, X-ray. A dentist uses X-rays to image your teeth, and airport security uses them to see through your bag. Hot gases in the universe also emit X-rays. All right, so everybody know what an X-ray is. And finally, gamma rays. Doctors use gamma ray imaging to see inside your body. The biggest gamma ray generator of all is the universe. So gamma rays are the yellow or the violet or white spectrum, or at the high intense frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum. So all these different forms of radiation I just read: gamma ray radiation, X-ray radiation, ultraviolet radiation, visible light radiation, infrared radiation, microwave radiation, radio wave radiation. All these are, can be transmutated, or in other words, energy can be changed from one level to another by this substance that we call melanin. So also understand that the cerebral spinal fluid, or the melanin in the central nervous system, has the ability to transmute energy to all the various forms on the electromagnetic spectrum. All right. So just understand that the melanin inside you, when you are receiving the light from the sun outside, the melanin inside you has the ability to transmutate that through all these various forms on the electromagnetic spectrum. All right. So that means even when we physically, quote unquote, die, the soul energy, or the melanin energy that we are made of, we really are just going to go to another part of the electromagnetic spectrum that is beyond, clearly, visible light. It's clearly going to be beyond radio waves, and it's beyond microwaves. It's beyond these lower waves that are on, what we'll call the sphere of density, or the sphere of dimensions as well. So all these different variations of energy on the electromagnetic spectrum, they can also correlate to different dimensions. Okay, and the dimension just could be another part, another point in space and time. Okay, that's pretty much what a dimension is, another point in space and time. All right. So just like when we were reading right here, and then we're gonna move on, how you have those radio waves and how your radio at home is receiving the radio waves being emitted by the radio station. Well, there are other dimensions where parts of our cells are existing simultaneous with us now, and maybe even other beings that could be located even in the 6th and 7th dimension. They could be communicating with you, you know what I'm saying, through the electromagnetic spectrum. All right. So I just wanted you to see how powerful the electromagnetic spectrum is, and understand what it is when we're dealing with the sun outside. Because all these sciences that I just, that we briefly going over right now, these are some of the Naga sciences that, the Moorish scientists used when they got ready to construct a lot of their genetic experiments, when they started to splice and they started to, come up with all these different genetic combinations and variations, etc. Started to modify, genetic codes, when they started to realize within the human, genetic strand, what certain codes were for what certain codes were for eye color, which ones were for skin pigmentation, all the way down to where, you know how today they have a little store that's called Build a Bear, and you can go in there and build a bear how you want. And they also are starting to put out certain advertisements now that where you can build a baby like you want. You know, you can choose the baby's eye color, you can choose the baby's skin tone, etc., because they are genetically manipulating and creating an artificial being versus how the natural cosmic universe would create a being. A lot of these sciences come back from these, Moorish alchemists who were very, very learned in some of the stuff that we're talking about. All right. So these people understood how to transmutate the carbon or the dark stage to the golden stage. But as we'll see in a little while, some of these Moorish alchemists had some rather perverted or inverted desires and wishes, and they started to use this science in a illicit manner. All right. So what they did is they started to draft or create a being who actually could be locked down or could be kept inside of a prison when it regards to the electromagnetic spectrum. So in a little while, we're going to read into a being, or a certain species of beings that were actually created and manifested, but whoever did it, they clearly did not want them to go beyond a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum, because whoever created them at the genetic level, they tampered with the reproduction of the cerebral spinal fluid, and they tampered with the ability to produce central nervous system melanin. All right. And because of that, when these beings were brought into, manifestation, they were destined and doomed to only live a, rather physical life. All right. So before we go into that science, what we want to do real quick is read into The Clock of Destiny, Volume 1 by C.M. Bay. And there's a certain part where he goes into how the Moorish alchemists understood the electromagnetic spectrum. And basically, they understood how the melanin could transmutate energy throughout the electromagnetic spectrum. All right. So let's read into that a little bit. So here we are. The Moorish color code in electronics, which describes the unit of resistance, current, and voltage, the magnetic law, atomic energy, is as follows. 0 symbolizes black, 1 symbolizes brown, 2 symbolizes red, 3 symbolizes orange, 4 symbolizes yellow, 5 symbolizes green, 6 symbolizes blue, 7 symbolizes violet, 8 symbolizes gray, 9 symbolizes light or white. So before we move on real quick, I just want us to clearly see that this sounds almost like a electromagnetic spectrum, or it is arranged the same way, as we just read about with the electromagnetic spectrum. In other words, you're hearing these colors, okay? You're hearing these colors, and the color vibrations and frequencies are increasing, all right? So 0 being black, 9 being the light or the white, okay? So it's from 0 to 9, from the black to the light, all right, or the white light. Our Moorish forefathers had harnessed atomic energy and employed it for both good and ill centuries before the red-skinned blondes of Patagonia had become educated by the cultured Moors. Atomic energy is new to the quote-unquote white people, but not to the Moors. The Christian race and color scheme was founded upon the Moorish color code of electronics. Now, this is very, very important what we're about to get into, because a lot of people want to know that where does caste systems come from? This modern day synthetic system that we call racism. Where does this thing come from? This whole idea of, segregating people based on color, segregating people really based on the electromagnetic spectrum that they can reach to. That's really what we're getting. That's really what we're boiling down to, because the skin tone thing really just is dealing with the melanin. As we said, you have the U melanin that's in the skin tone that's going to provide the color, that's going to provide some type of earth tone, that autochthonous people share. And then you have the melanin that is in the central nervous system that's flowing throughout the brain and throughout the body. Okay. So, this is what we're dealing with. And so really, like, when people are being segregated based on people's energies not being able to coexist with each other. All right. So a lot of times, let's think back to, let's say, the 1940s and 30s, when the ancestors here in North America were dealing with a lot of bullshit and quote unquote racism, and how people would have, Caucasian people would have posters that say we want to keep our neighborhoods white, no race mixing and all that other stuff. What a lot of us have to realize is that it's not necessarily that they even didn't like the skin tones of our people, but you got to understand when different peoples of different variations of melanin are around each other, some people feel irritated by other people's energy. So you know how you may be around some person and you may feel like, man, I can't stand this nigga. Like, bro, lame as fuck. Like, like, man, like she lame. Like, oh damn, like I really don't fuck with her like that. And you getting a certain vibration from them, and then you even feeling a certain vibration within yourself. Well, the melanin spectrum works even deeper when it comes to different species. So imagine if a certain species doesn't share the same degrees of melanin as other species. That means it's going to feel much more irritated around them, and it's going to want to spend a lot of time isolated, and it's going to create a more xenophobic perspective of these people. So a lot of times, the reason why Caucasians want to keep their neighborhoods and their schools and stuff just Caucasian is because they cannot take the vibration and they cannot take the heat that people of strong melanin that they give off, and it's irritating to them. It physically irritates them, the physicality of it. All right, so this shit is much deeper than we think. It's much deeper than somebody just not liking your skin tone. So let's reread this part so we can understand some of the sciences that these Moorish alchemists used to get into these genetic, experiments. Okay, it says the Moorish color code in electronics, which describes the unit of resistance, current, voltage, the magnetic law, atomic energy, is as follows. So these are some of the science these Moorish alchemists used to do their genetic, experimentations. They were using the sciences of electronics. They were using the sciences of electronics and electricity, They were using the sciences of magnetism and magnetic law, and they were using the sciences of atomic energy. So these are some of the core sciences that the Moorish alchemists were using to get involved in some of the stuff that they were doing. Then it goes on to say our Moorish forefathers had harnessed atomic energy and employed it for both good and ill many centuries before the red-skinned blondes of Patagonia became educated by the cultured Moors. So right here, Siembe is telling us that the Moorish forefathers already knew about atomic energy. So that means that in the ancient times of Atlantis, they were already using atomic energy. They had the luxury it provided, but on the downside, it also, created consequence because they use it for warfare. And also in a little while, we'll see they use it for genetic modification. And then it goes on to say that the Christian code and color scheme was founded upon the Moorish color code of electronics. Now, we first created the color code system of electronics because after the initial Yakub experiments happened, we realized that these alternate beings that were brought forth to the planet had a certain lower level energy and an animalistic energy about them to where they irritated most of us. So we segregated them and we had them live amongst themselves, you know what I'm saying? Because when they lived around us, it was causing too much chaos. So the same way that, the Caucasian may feel about Moorish people, Moorish people feel the same way about the Caucasian. It's just today, we have this fake integrated mindset, and a lot of our people, just shuck and jive to get money and feel cool. But deep down inside, when a lot of y'all are around these Caucasians, you feel that irritation and you feel that disgust and really don't want to be around them just as much as they don't want to be around you. So we got to keep it real about how we really feel about each other. But anyway, so now let's go deeper into this. So now we're going to go deeper into some of the Moorish alchemical genetic manipulation projects that brought forth the hominid and brought forth the entity that anthropology, likes to call the Neanderthal. All right, so let me repeat that. So right now, Blackbeard is about to take the people in the Mirage ship, and we're about to go deep into the sciences of the creation of the hominid and the creation of what anthropology likes to call the Neanderthal. All right. Now, in order to do this, we're going to deal with some material put out by an author named H.P. Lovecraft. We're about to deal with some material put out by an author named H.P. Lovecraft. Now, H.P. Lovecraft was basically an occult, author who lived during the earlier 20th century, and he wrote a lot of horror themes, and he's basically the father of horror when it comes to the European Caucasian. A lot of their literature and stuff like that, or at least the modern day one, the ones that's making these movies in Hollywood and stuff. There are people like Stephen King, etc., Clive Barker, these type of people. Really a lot of people I like. You know what I'm saying? Because one of my favorite filmmakers would be Clive Barker, the one who created Candyman and also the Hellraiser series. But anyway, a lot of these authors and filmmakers were inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. So just keep in mind that H.P. Lovecraft is the nucleus of Caucasian occult horror. This is who they go to. They go to H.P. Lovecraft, and they go to Aleister Crowley. These are the fathers of occult horror and occult arts and the occult or creative arts of the Caucasian male. It's H.P. Lovecraft and Aleister Crowley. Never forget that. But anyway, but as you know, with Aleister Crowley, he admitted that most of his stuff came from Moorish Egypt, and Al-Andalus, etc. So that's also where H.P. Lovecraft got a lot of his stuff. Because if you read and study into H.P. Lovecraft, he had a lot of problems with racism. And, maybe some of his racism came from the fact that he knew, most of what he got his stuff from came from people that he, quote unquote, didn't like. All right. But anyway, one of H.P. Lovecraft's works is a small story by the name of Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Germain and His Family. All right. Now we're gonna read into this, and it's kind of a lot, so we're gonna dance around and jump around a little bit, but we're gonna read enough for you all to get the point, so we can go into some of the origins of pale people, go into some of the origins of where the human and animal DNA was mixed, and where some of the original ape-man miscegenation took place. Okay, because a lot of the times, the Caucasian male, he likes to say that everybody came from quote unquote Africa, which may be true in one way, but what he's not telling you is that the ancestor that he has through the link of Africa is not even a real human being. It's actually a human hominid hybrid. All right. And this was actually the result from some of these Jacobian or Moorish alchemical projects that really went wrong. All right. So, so just so a little appetizer or a little nugget before we get to reading is that some of these alchemical, Moorish projects took place in the jungles of South Africa and also Central Africa. Okay. South and Central Africa is also another place where some of these alchemical human hybrid, experimentations took place. All right. So it was Moors all over the world doing a lot of this shit. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't just the Moors in Northern Europa, and it wasn't just the Moors in Central Africa. You even had Moors over here doing it. That's why when you're reading a lot of CMB stuff, he talks about the Patagonian blondes, or the blonde-haired people of South America. Okay? Because he's talking about the Moorish experiments that went down over here, and how a lot of these people also were banished in the Colorado mountains and in the Appalachian mountains, banished in the Andes mountains, and banished in a lot of the mountainous regions of North America. So when we say Caucasian people or the Caucasus Mountains, we're not always talking about over in Europa. We're also talking about the Appalachian Mountains and some of the different mountains that are right here in the Americas. Because after these experiments went wrong, believe it or not, some of these people were tossed up in them mountains. That's why you have horror movies like The Hills Have Eyes. Who out there has seen the movie The Hills Have Eyes? That was one of my favorites. And they talked about this ancestral hybrid type of people who lived in this remote area, and some folks that, her car broke down and ended up breaking down in these folks' remote area. And when you saw them, it was these, like these Jacobian experimentations, these abortions from the Mount Olympus projects that went wrong. All right. So let's go into this right now. So we're going to read H.P. Lovecraft, Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Germain and His Family. Life is a hideous thing, and it comes from the background behind what we know of its pure, demonical hints of truth, which makes it sometimes a thousandfold more hideous. Science, already oppressive with its shocking revelations, will perhaps be the ultimate exterminator of our human species, if separate species we be, for its reserve of unguessed horrors could never be borne by mortal brains if loosed upon the world. If we knew what we are, we should do as Sir Arthur Germain did. And Arthur Germain soaked himself in oil and set fire to his clothing one night. No one placed the charred fragments in an urn or set a memorial to him who had been, for certain papers and a certain box object were found, which made men wish to forget. Someone who knew him do not admit that he ever existed. Arthur Germain. So before we move on, what we have right here is H.P. Lovecraft going into the initial part of the story where it says here that if we knew who we are, we would do as Sir Arthur Germain did. And Arthur Germain soaked himself in oil and set fire to his clothing one night. So clearly the main character of this story, who is Arthur Germain, found some information out. And upon finding this information out, he decided to kill suicide by soaking himself in oil and setting himself on fire. So I wonder what he could have learned. Well, let's find out. Arthur Germain went out on the moor and burned himself after seeing the box object which had come from Africa. It was this object and not his peculiar personal appearance which made him end his life. Many would have disliked to live if possessed of the peculiar features of Arthur Germain, but he had been a poet and scholar and had not minded. Learning what was in his blood, for his great-grandfather, Sir Robert Germain, had been an anthropologist of note, while his great-great-great-grandfather, Sir Wade Germain, was one of the earliest explorers of the Congo region and had written eruditely of its tribes, animals, and supposed antiquities. Indeed, old Sir Wade had possessed an intellectual zeal amounting almost to a mania. His bizarre conjectures of a prehistoric white Congolese civilization earning him much ridicule when his book, Observations on the Several Parts of Africa, was published. In 1765, this fearless explorer had been placed in a madhouse at Huntington. So what we have right here is saying that Arthur Germain had received a box, I guess, that came from Africa. But this box that he got from Africa contains some contents, and it's also saying here that he learned, it says, quote, learning was in his blood, what was in his blood, for his great-grandfather, Sir Robert Germain, had been an anthropologist, and his great-great-great-grandfather, Sir Wade Germain, was one of the earliest explorers of the Congo region. So clearly his great-grandfather was great-great-great-grandfather was an explorer in the Congo region. He was studying the tribes and all the animals. But then it goes on to say that his bizarre conjectures on a prehistoric white Congolese civilization earning him much ridicule in his book. So clearly one of his patriarchal ancestors wrote a book concerning a quote-unquote prehistoric white Congolese civilization. So let's continue. So we get into the story. So we first have, this guy Arthur Germain, who's the main character. Arthur Germain received a box of and had some contents in it. Arthur Germain's great-great-grandfather was an explorer in the Congolese region, and his father was an anthropologist. So clearly these men were into, trying to figure out the origins of things. But then he found out something that made him commit suicide. So the question I'm asking you to keep in your mind as we go deeper down the Mirage black hole is, what could he have learned to make him commit suicide? Let's keep on going. Madness was in all the Germains, and people were glad there were not many of them. The line put forth no branches, and Arthur was the last of it. If he had not been, one cannot say what we would have done when the object came. The Germains never seemed to look quite right. Something was amiss, though Arthur was the worst, and the old family portraits in Germain House showed fine faces enough before Sir Wade's time. Certainly the madness began with Sir Wade, whose wild stories of Africa were at once the delight and terror of his few friends. It showed in his collection of trophies and specimens, which were not such as a normal man would accumulate and preserve, and appeared strikingly in the oriental seclusion in which he kept his wife. All right, so let's keep moving on. Let's keep moving on. All right, let's keep moving on. So really what we want to go into is what he found out. What was going on in the Congo, Africa? And why did nobody like the Germains? Because it says that madness was in all of them. So it said eventually all these men went mad. So what's going on with them? Let's see. All right. Just bear with me. All right, here we are. Friends said that it was this series of griefs which unhinged the mind of Sir Robert Germain, yet it was probably merely a bit of African folklore which caused the disaster. The elder scholar had been collecting legends of the Onga tribes near the field of his grandfathers in his own explorations, hoping in some way to account for Sir Wade's wild tales of a lost city peopled by strange hybrid creatures. Let me repeat that part, because now we're getting there. It says that the elderly scholar had been collecting legends of the Onga tribes near the field of his grandfathers and his own explorations, hoping in some way to account for Sir Wade's wild tales of a lost city peopled by strange hybrid creatures. A certain consistency in the strange papers of his ancestor suggested that the madman's imagination might have been stimulated by native myths. On October the 19th, 1852, the explorer Samuel Seaton called at Germain House with a manuscript noting collecting among the Ongas, believing that the certain legends of a great city of white apes ruled by a white god might prove valuable to the ethnologist. In his conversation, he probably supplied many additional details, the nature of which will never be known, since a hideous series of tragedies suddenly burst into being. When Sir Robert Germain emerged from his library, he left behind the strangled corpse of the explorer, and before he could be restrained, he put an end to all three of his children, the two who were never seen, and a son who had run away. Neville Germain died in a successful defense of his own 2-year-old son, who had apparently been included in the old man's madly murderous scheme. Sir Robert himself, after repeatedly attempts at suicide and a stubborn refusal to utter any articulate sound, died of apoplexy in the second year of his confinement. So right here we had some wild shit go down real quick. So before we move on, it says that Sir Robert Germain was hoping in some way to justify or make sense of Sir Wade's wild tales of a lost city peopled by strange hybrid creatures. So pretty much what happened was the great grandfather who was doing, research in the Congo, he came across the Onga tribe, and the Onga tribe started to make him aware of what's going on in their city, the origins of their people and all this other stuff. So as he's learning about them, they also make this guy aware of this lost city who was actually ruled by these strange, hybrid creatures. And these hybrid creatures were a city of white apes, and they were ruled by a white god. So upon him coming in this information, this patriarchal Jermaine, because remember it's three of them. You got the great great grandfather, he was the explorer in the Congo. Then you have the grandfather, who was an anthropologist, and then you have the main character. So it's three men. But when the great great grandfather found this out, there was a tragedy happened where, he went and tried to kill his family and killed himself, all the way down to now, where this final guy is figuring out this information, and now he's going about wanting to, get ready to hurt himself because of what he's finding out. So just keep in mind that, in the middle of the Congo, there were these hybrids. All right. Now, where we want to go now, because basically it's the part I want to get to, and then we're going to transition to, the summary of this. All right. So we can wrap it up. Because basically what we read now is I just want you to understand and get an account from a story on, when a lot of these experimentations or whenever this stuff was going down, it wasn't like it was happening in the public. And it also wasn't like everybody was down with this shit. You know what I'm saying? These things were happening in, ducked off areas, caverns and stuff like that, away from everybody else. And then when the shit hit the fan, they just took the damn, projects that didn't go right, and they just tried to, leave them in the jungles, or leave them in the woods, or leave them in the caves, or leave them in the forest, and just try to leave them there and think that they're gonna die off. But this isn't what happened. These entities started to procreate with each other, and basically they survived it. And then eventually they came out and reintroduced themselves into society. All right. Now this entity that we're talking about is what we call in the modern day world, the Neanderthal. Okay, that's what we're talking about. All right, so let's continue. All right. It was the mind and character of Arthur Germain which atoned for his aspect. Gifted and learned, he took highest honors at Oxford, and seemed likely to redeem the intellectual fame of his family. Though of poetic rather than scientific temperament, he planned to continue the work of his forefathers in African ethnology and antiquities, utilizing the truly wonderful though strange collection of Sir Wade. With his fanciful mind, he thought often of the prehistoric civilization in which the mad explorer had so implicitly believed, and would weave tale after tale about the silent jungle city mentioned in the latter's wilder notes and paragraphs. For the nebulous utterances concerning a nameless, unsuspected race of jungle hybrids, he had a peculiar feeling of mingled terror and attraction, speculating on the possible basis of such a fancy and seeking to obtain light among the more recent data gleaned by his great-grandfather and Samuel Seton amongst the Ongas. So once again, we're getting deeper into what's really going on here. The great-great-grandfather pretty much went crazy because he found out about these unsuspected quote-unquote jungle hybrids that were in the Congo and his connection to them, because we're getting deeper to something in a minute. So stick with me, y'all. We're getting there. In 1911, after the death of his mother, Sir Arthur Germain determined to pursue his investigations to the utmost extent. Selling a portion of his estate to obtain the requisite money, he outfitted an expedition and sailed to the Congo. Arranging with the Belgian authorities for a party of guides, he spent a year in the Onga and Kaliri country, finding data beyond the highest of his expectations. Among the Kaliras was an aged chief called Mwanu, who possessed not only a highly retentive memory, but a singular degree of intelligence and interest in old legends. This ancient confirmed every tale which Germain had heard, adding his own account of the stone city and the white apes as it had been told to him. So here we have right here, it's saying that this man Germain, after his mom died, he took a little bit of his estate in 1911, and then he went on a voyage into the Congo. When he got to the Congo, he found a tribe called the Kaliris, and there was an old chief in the Kaliris named Mwanu. This man verified all the tales he had heard and all the accounts that his great-great-grandfather had written down, and basically told him that there was a stone city and the white apes had roamed this stone city. According to Moanu, the gray city and the hybrid creatures were no more, having been annihilated by the warlike Mbangus many years ago. This tribe, after destroying most of the edifices and killing the live beings, had carried off the stuffed goddess which had been the object of their quest. The white ape goddess, which the strange beings worshipped, and which was held by Congo tradition to be the form of one who had regained as a princess among those beings. Just what the white ape-like creatures could have been, Moanu had no idea, but he thought they were the builders of the ruined city. Germain could form no conjecture, but by close questioning obtained a very picturesque legend of the stuffed goddess. So here we have right here, it's getting into some weird shit. It's saying, this man who was from the area is saying that these hybrid creatures, these white apes, had a white ape goddess that they worshipped. And pretty much this whole clan of people were wiped out by a warlike people who came in and took them out. But he's verifying the story. You know what I'm saying? He's verifying the story. All right? He's verifying the story. So moving on. Let me see. All right. So here we are. So remember we had that boxed object that made Germain kill itself. So let's see what happened. The box object was delivered at Germain House on the afternoon of August the 3rd, 1913, being conveyed immediately to the large chamber which housed the collection of African specimens as arranged by Sir Robert and Arthur. What ensued can best be gathered from the tales of servants and from things and papers later examined. Of the various tales, that of A. Soames, the family butler, is the most ample and coherent. According to this trustworthy man, Sir Arthur Germain dismissed everyone from the room before opening the box, though the instant sound of hammer and chisel showed that he did not delay the operation. Nothing was heard for some time. Just how long Soames cannot exactly estimate, but it was certainly less than a quarter of an hour that the horrible scream, undoubtedly in Germain's voice, was heard. Immediately afterward, Germain emerged from the room, rushing frantically towards the front of the house as if pursued by some hideous enemy. The front door he seemed to think of. The expression on his face, a face ghastly enough in repose, was beyond description. When near the front door he seemed to think of something and turned back in his flight, finally disappearing to the stairs of the cellar. The servants were utterly dumbfounded and watched at the head of the stairs, but their master did not return. A smell of oil was all that came up from the regions below. After dark, a rattling was heard at the door leading from the cellar into the courtyard, and a stable boy saw Arthur Germain glistening from head to foot with oil and redolent of that of fluid, steal furtively out and vanish on the black moor surrounding the house. Then, in an exhaustion of supreme horror, everyone saw the end. A spark appeared on the moor, a flame arose, and a pillar of human fire reached to the heavens. The house of Germain no longer existed. So clearly what happened was Arthur Germain got the box that came to his house on August the 3rd, 1913. He looked in the box and he saw a horror that pretty much made him go and burn himself alive. Let's read the last paragraph. The reason why Arthur Germain's charred fragments were not collected and buried lies in what was found afterward, principally the thing in the box. The stuffed goddess was a nauseous sight, withered and eating away, but it was clearly a mummified white ape of some unknown species, less hairy than any recorded variety, and infinitely nearer mankind, quite shockingly so. Detailed description would be rather unpleasant, but two salient particulars must be told, for they fit in revolting with certain notes of Sir Wade Germain's African expeditions and with the Congolese legends of the White God and the Ape Princess. The two particulars in question are these: the arms of the golden locket about the creature's neck were the Germain's arms, and the jocose suggestion of Verhaeren, I don't know who that is, about a certain resemblance as connected to the shriveled face applied with vivid, ghastly, and unnatural horror to none other than the sensitive Arthur Germain, the great-great-great-grandson of Sir Wade Germain and an unknown wife. Members of the Royal Anthropological Institute burned the thing and threw the locket into a well, and some of them do not admit that Arthur Germain ever existed. So clearly what happened is Arthur Germain found out that he actually was related to the white apes that were found in the Congo. Let's reread this part again. It says the stuffed goddess, remember now, the stuffed goddess is the white ape goddess that they worshipped in the Congo. It says that the stuffed goddess who was mummified, so it was a mummified white ape. It said the mummified white ape had, it said the mummified white ape had a certain resemblance as connected with the shriveled face applied with vivid, ghastly, and unnatural horror to none other than the sensitive Arthur Germain, great-great-great-grandson of Sir Wade Germain and an unknown wife. So clearly, he was the great-great-grandson of Sir Wayne Germain and the white ape goddess. So clearly what it was is that when this Caucasian man found out that he was the great-great-grandson of a human man and a white ape female, he burned himself alive. Okay? So that's one of the H.P. Lovecraft stories of these creatures, that were from the Yakub experiment, but were banished out. So now let's just read a little bit about this story. Let's read about this story a little bit. A commentary, rather. All right. Lovecraft, this is called A Separate Species, The Origin of Germain. All right. So it's called A Separate Species, The Origin of the Germain. All right. It says, by the autumn of 1920, Lovecraft wrote Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Germain and His Family. It was published under the title in the Wolverine magazine for March and June 1921 in two parts. In the first one, the history of the noble Germain family is narrated since the 18th century until the 20th century, The second part tells us indeed about the facts concerning the own Sir Arthur Germain. The tale takes place in Europe and Africa, but in this last place, the continents merge in the ruins of a Congo city whose true origins are not explicitly mentioned in the story. All right, so let's move on. There's a certain part I just want to get to. All right. Let me see that part. No. Here we go. Oh, this is it. Let me see. Oh yeah, my bad. The term Great Ape refers to, from a taxonomical point of view, the hominid, to which all great apes, even humans, belong. But Lovecraft did not include humans in this definition, which is entirely viable, since the term can have a more indefinite connotation and refer to all apes but humans. With this in mind, the dying city was overrun by great apes, but for unknown reasons, they did not kill the survivors. Rather, they lived together for some time, even crossing with them. Their progeny is so incredible that the author spared no effort in definitions. They are not only creatures, half of the jungle and half of the city, but also fabulous creatures and even living things. Lovecraft let the reader imagine the actual appearance of the sons of the jungle, but he does not highlight that such miscegenation can only beget a progeny so unnatural that no term can describe it with certainty. So what H.P. Lovecraft was trying to get the reader to understand is that, you know, he was trying to go on to the Yakub thing on how there was a point in time where whatever the hominid or the early, intelligent ape species, you know, it mixed its blood with human beings. It mixed its blood with human beings. You know, that's what it did. And some of the tribes in Africa, some of the Hamitic tribes in Africa, mixed in with a hominid type species. Okay, that's what he's going into. So let's move on. It would take a long time for such hybrid creature to breed the white apes that haunted the ruins. So in the 18th century, the tale tells about a Portuguese trader settled in Africa, perhaps far from the European continent, because he did not like English ways. At some point, and probably driven by a zoophilic bent, this man coupled with a female member of the white ape-like creatures, and they had a daughter. Did you hear that? At some point, and probably driven by a zoophilic bent, this man coupled with a female member of the white ape-like creatures, and they had a daughter. Her physical appearance could not be other than a white ape, and indefinitely nearer to humankind. Although only the Portuguese trader is mentioned in the tale, it can be inferred that possibly he was the true discoverer of the city in ruins. When Sir Wade arrives to Africa on his second voyage, he makes contact with the trader, meets his daughter, and marries her. For some time, Sir Wade and his ape wife reigned over the ruins as gods. It is likely that the English aristocrat were deified simply as a result of having white skin, very similar to that of his consort. The first of the Germain, who will provide some alienation to the future human lineage, is born from this union. Philip Germain saw the light in the Congo, probably among the ruins discovered by his Portuguese grandfather. So it's saying right here that, you got to remember now, when the Portuguese went into Africa, this is around the 1600s. You know what I'm saying? This is when they started going down and try to tear down the barbarian empires around the Horn of Africa. But some of these different Europeans started to voyage inland. And some of these pale-skinned Europeans ran across some of these pale hominids out there, and they intermingled. So what happened is that the great-great-great-grandfather of Germain, when he got there, he was the white god, and his consort was the white ape princess, and they had a daughter. Okay? That's what it was. They had a daughter. Right? So this is some of these stories now that, some of these stories. All right, so this is the part I'm probably going to read. The lineage of the Germain family continues with Sir Robert Neville, Sir Alfred, and Sir Arthur. It is Sir Arthur who, in 1913, ends an unholy miscegenation which transcends the family nucleus. In fact, the acceptance that not only the Germain, but all the existing human race has been mixed with the blood of a white ape-like race is the kernel of AJ, and it is thus suggested by the strong sentence in the first paragraph: if separate species we be. Josie holds that the city in ruins is the source of all white civilization. Let me repeat. Josie holds that the city in ruins is the source of all white civilization. At some time in the past, the progeny of the white apes, descendants in turn of the great apes, and members of the original white civilization that built the city, migrated out of Africa and spread all over the world to found the white race. These immigrants, with an E, would be an isolated branch who left the main group in the city, wherefrom the white ape who will mate with the Portuguese trader in the 18th century will emerge. The branch which spread around the world represents the origin of all hominids, leading the way up to the Australopithecus, who lived in Eastern Africa about 4 million years ago. From then on, anthropology collects all the human evolution, scientifically proven. But we know from Arthur Germain that the science is really unreliable. So pretty much, man, what happened is, let's go through this. It says the lineage of the Germains continues with Sir Robert, but of course the story we read about was about Sir Arthur, who ends an unholy miscegenation which transcends the human family nucleus, excuse me. But it goes on to say that he found out that the existing human race has been mixed with the blood of the white ape-like race. And then he goes on to say that this city in the Congo, in the ruins, is a source of all white civilization. So it's saying all white civilization sprung from this white ape civilization in the Congo. Okay, so this is the Congo, Africa we talking about. And it goes on also to say that at some point in the past, the progeny of white apes migrated out of Africa and spread all over the world. So these white apes were the descendants of the great apes and members of the original white civilization that built the city in the Congo. And they migrated out of Africa. And it says that an isolated branch actually stayed back. So in other words, some of these white apes stayed back in Africa, and then some of them started to migrate out. So when you hear about that shit about the Neanderthal left Africa, those were just the white apes that left. So the white ape is the Neanderthal. Okay, the white ape is the Neanderthal. All right, and there were an original branch of them actually in Central and Southern Africa. Okay, so a lot of the Yakub stuff, it happened in Central and Southern Africa, and a lot of the Neanderthals, they migrated out of that, or left up out of there, or really were kicked out, and they were a lot of them were carried across the hot desert. So when you all hear about the Yakub story dealing with General Monk, and you hear about them being walked across the Arabian desert, and they had to wear the white aprons to cover up their genitalia, and their feet were burning on the hot sands, and we chased them up into the the caves and hills of Turkey. This is where that story came from, y'all. So these white apes, you know what I'm saying, these primate hominids, these pale hominids, these were the children of the Yakub experiments, because the original ones probably were manifested thousands of years. Because you got to remember now, the story I'm reading about, we talking about the 18 and 1900s, y'all. The Yakub experiment was thousands of years ago. So if these Portuguese that went into Africa in the 15 and 16 and 1700s, if they went in there and they still were amalgamating with the white hominid species, that means that they had been there for a while. They had been there for a while. Okay. But the original Yakub experiments, those were thousands of years ago. All right. So to wrap it up, whoever created the original hominid, or the original white ape, or the original primate, or the original Neanderthal, wanted to create a being who could only go so far on the electromagnetic spectrum. And it also created a being that it would draft and completely remove and restrict all production and all progression of melanin in the central nervous system and in the skin pigmentation, because none of these apes had the melanin in the brain. These white apes that was leaving up out of there, the Neanderthal, it has no, it has a base level of melanin. It has a sulfur level of melanin. All right. And the reason why is because whatever created them, it did not want them to have melanin. It did not want them to go beyond the third dimension of visible light. Okay. So that is actually what the truth of it is. So the Neanderthal, or the hominid, or really anyone who has the blood of the Neanderthal or the hominid, it knows nothing about the spiritual realm. It knows nothing about the third eye. It knows nothing about, those other spectrums of light that we talked about. It pretty much stops at the visible spectrum. Okay. So we start talking about gamma rays, when we start talking about X-rays, when we start talking about infrared waves and all that other stuff, it doesn't have the melanin to perceive that. Okay. And it actually starts to get mentally and spiritually irritated when it tries to go beyond those levels of visible light. Okay. So that's really what it is. It's the melanin in the central nervous system that we all genetically inherited from our forefathers and our foremothers. But if your ancestors did not have it, then more than likely today you don't have it. You know? So the reason why they pump a lot of the interracial thing and stuff like that is so they could create another species of people who will still carry on the Neanderthal strand, but will have a little bit more of the melanin in them. So that's really what that's all about. You know what I'm saying? So we just had to go over some knockout or some Negus sciences. You know, I try to make it as basic as possible. It was some laid back shit, but y'all go do y'all research on this and look deeper into this stuff. Some say it's, you know, mythology. Some say it's science. You know what I'm saying? But that's up to you. That's up to you, you know. Well, it's your boy Blackbeard. Y'all stay tuned. I'm out.